Hello, honeys. Welcome to your first Beesness of April 2025. Today we'll be covering headlines from the final calendar week of March. Quick apologies, honeys, for any background noise you might hear. They are, from the sound of it, demolishing the apartment above mine and have been doing so all day. But first, a couple updates from your host's personal life. This Saturday, I'll be playing my first rugby game with the Madison Women's Rugby Club. I am very excited and also very nervous for that, having been essentially out of the game for about 4 months now. And over at the Historical Society, I've been able to take on a couple new projects and attend a few more trainings across the educational division, so things are rocking and rolling there. As always, follow-ups first. We learned last week that there will be no more soupings as Just Stop Oil has decided to end its protests. The British environmental activist group, which was created in 2022, announced they're going to end their current civil resistance campaign after a final protest occurs in Parliament Square of London, April 26th. The group has frequently made headlines for their stunts in the last few years, some of which include gluing themselves to a Turner painting in Manchester back in 2022, souping Van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery twice in 2022 and 2024, and as we covered at the time, spraying orange cornflower on Stonehenge in 2024. A current rundown provided by our sources indicates that 7 Just Stop Oil activists are in prison serving sentences of up to 4 years, 8 are on remand, and 16 more are due to be sentenced in the next few months. Said Just Stop Oil in their announcement/statement their, quote, initial demand to end new oil and gas is now government policy, making us one of the most successful civil resistance campaigns in recent history. We've made fossil fuel licensing front page news and kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground while courts have ruled new oil and gas unlawful, end quote. But as our sources said, this is not the end of all of the group's efforts. Just Stop Oil is currently creating a new strategy to resist and confront policies that will result in the predicted point of no return, aka 3 degrees further of warming. Celsius, that is. We additionally heard last week that Melbourne's Monash University Museum of Art has, quote, indefinitely postponed, end quote, an upcoming exhibition and publication project featuring the work of Lebanese-born artist Khalid Sabsabi titled Stolen Press, Flat Earth. As we covered last month, Sabsabi was selected for, then controversially days later dropped from the representative position for the Australian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale after alarm was raised in media and parliament about some of Sabsabi's more political works from more than 15 years ago. This show was set to open at the museum on May 8th and run through July 5th. It had been in the works for 18 months and was meant to examine the relationship between curatorial and editorial practices. The project featured contributions by Sabsabi's longtime collaborators Stolen Press, a Sydney-based publishing collective, and Elisa Taber, a Paraguayan-Canadian writer and anthropologist. A Monash University spokesperson confirmed to Hyperallergic that the exhibition had been postponed, but not whether the scheduling change was tied to Sabsabi's withdrawn Biennale appointment or if a new date had yet been chosen for it. We care about this headline, honeys, because it seems to prove Sabsabi's gallerist, Josh Milani, right when he said on March 25th that he had previously warned Creative Australia that the dismissal of Sabsabi, quote, had already set in motion the dismantling of his career and livelihood, end quote. He went on to say, quote, Creative Australia has allowed the mischaracterization of him as a terrorist sympathizer to go unchecked, end quote. The gallerist urged Creative Australia to reverse its decision to drop the artist from the Biennale in order to save his career while arguing that Sabsabi opposes all forms of violence, including anti-Semitism. He said he's also written to the Australian Minister for Home Affairs of Australia, Tony Burke, to take action because, quote, it is not a question of political interference, but one of good governance, end quote. We also learned that Texas has dropped its case against the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth as well as Sally Mann. According to the state's district attorney office, Texas's Tarrant County will not take legal action against the museum for showing Mann's photographs, which some alleged back in January when the show opened constituted quote-unquote child pornography. We found the timing on this announcement pretty interesting, honeys. The news comes as the museum prepares for a change in leadership in July following the retirement of its longtime director, Marla Price. Current employee Helena Norton Westbrook will take the helm. Another potential concern is that no one seems to know what exactly is next for the photos, as the temporary group exhibition in which they were featured, Diaries of a Home, has since closed. No matter what, the three civil liberties unions who took action back in February against these removals should be pretty happy with this announcement. And our last and possibly most notable follow-up, the Brooklyn Museum has paused its layoffs, but workers are not out of the woods yet. The museum hit pause on those planned layoffs after the city of New York confirmed an additional $100,000 US in funding for the current fiscal year. The fate of 15 workers was unclear until the city stepped in with that promise. We already knew that of the 47 full and part-time total workers expected to be cut, 27 unionized workers had accepted voluntary buyouts last week, and at least 5 other non-unionized staffers were given a layoff notice back in February. As we've seen, however, these planned cuts have proved pretty controversial. Union leaders have stressed their view that workers should not be taking the fall for the institution's economic troubles throughout the 6 weeks of protests and negotiations following the layoff announcements. Local 1502 Union President Wilson Suffrant said at a March 6 rally, quote, "They created a deficit and they want to balance that deficit on the backs of our unions," end quote. As we said, though, honeys, things are not completely settled here. Director of the Brooklyn Museum, Ann Pasternak, warned in an email to staff on March 24th that if that city money does not materialize, they, quote, "will unfortunately need to move ahead with previously planned reductions by June 30th, 2025, end quote. As you may imagine, the news of this tentative pause has been a temporary relief for culture workers across the country who are bracing for instability and job cuts amid rising expenses, unpredictable federal funding, and loosening labor protections. Think back to the February 28th Guggenheim layoffs of 20 workers without any warning, and pushback in the last month from San Francisco museum workers and their unions against layoffs from city budget reductions. All in all, we are seeing it becoming an increasingly scary time to be a cultural worker. We also heard last week about a trove of 800 Iron Age objects that was unearthed in England. The objects were buried about 2,000 years ago and discovered by metal detectorist Peter Heads in a field near Melsonby in North Yorkshire, England. Back in 2021, he tipped off authorities who subsequently excavated that trove. Those experts included Durham University archaeologists who were helped by the British Museum and used University of Southampton scanning tech. They began digging at the site in 2022 using a 120,000 pound or 155.5 thousand US dollar grant from Historic England. Some standout objects among the finds included 2 cauldrons, 3 ceremonial spears, 7 4-wheeled wagons or 2-wheeled chariots, elaborate harnesses for at least 14 horses, bridle fragments, 28 iron tires, and Mediterranean coral and colored glass. We wanted to include this headline, honeys, because it's considered one of the, quote, largest and most important, end quote, finds of its kind in the UK and speaks to the wealth and status of English elites of the time, which was more/higher than previously thought, as well as previously unknown trading connections with Europe, namely that Iron Age residents of northern England were trading with the growing Roman Empire in Western Europe. But also, an early analysis released Tuesday of last week indicates the items were purposefully destroyed before being buried. Quote, "It is believed they may have been burned on a funerary pyre, however, no remains have been found," end quote, which leaves many more questions about why. Hopefully, further analysis will lead to answers that I can provide you. We also learned about a Klimt portrait of a West African prince that resurfaced at an art fair. The work in question is a 2-foot-tall 1897 oil painting which depicts Prince William Ni Nordi Dewan, a member of the Ga or Osu people from present-day Ghana, against a backdrop of hazy floral, potentially wallpaper. Austrian gallery Weinerother and Kohlbacher discovered the work in 2023 after a couple of collectors brought the painting into their space. It was in very poor shape, but stamps on the back hinted that it was an original Klimt. After over 18 months of restoration, they were able to confirm that attribution. The portrait was displayed for the first time in nearly a century at last week's European Fine Art Fair in Maastricht, Netherlands, aka TFAF, where it's expected to sell for over 16 million US. The work's resurfacing matters because the work was created in the same year that Klimt co-founded the Vienna secession movement with a group of Austrian architects, sculptors, and painters looking to break away from the rigid traditional styles and hierarchies of the country's arts institutions at the time. So the piece actually embodies some early modernist impulses as well as the start of the shift in Klimt's focus and style. It also captures a dark side of European colonial history as the subject had been recruited to participate in a Viennese Völkerschau, or exploitative ethnographic showcase, aka a human zoo. These were popular across the continent during the 19th century, and art historian / Klimt expert Wilfried Weidinger told the Washington Post that the sitter, as well as 120 members of the Osu tribe, took part in euphemistically titled guest performances in Vienna between April and October of 1897, where they were displayed in front of roughly 10,000 people a day. Weidinger, who had been searching for the portrait for about 20 years, believes that after the exhibition, both Klimt and another artist friend painted the prints on commission, but that the patron ultimately chose the other artist's version, which is why Klimt's is unsigned. A representative for the gallery says the story of and the finding itself are very uncommon. While it generally specializes in works by Klimt and Austrian expressionist Egon Schiele, the gallery generally rediscovers drawings and watercolors by the artists due to their high output of works on paper. This painting uncovery is a celebrated break of routine. On a more serious note, we heard last week about wildfires in South Korea which have killed 28 people and destroyed the ancient Gwansa temple. The Gyeongsangbuk-do wildfire began in central Yeoseong County on the morning of March 22nd and rapidly spread across the county. At least 37,800 residents were advised to evacuate to shelters on March 27th, and reports from that day say that 38,665 hectares, or over 95,500 acres, have burned in the past 5 days or were still on fire. With over 300 structures destroyed, the damage is already the worst single forest fire in the country's history, blowing past the previous March 2000 record of 24,000 hectares or 59,000 acres burned. The architectural heritage loss in particular is a rising concern, as 20 out of 30 structures of a major Buddhist temple complex founded in 681 CE, located at the bottom of Jeongun Mountain in the town of Yeoseong, were completely burned down. The destroyed buildings included two which were designated national treasures: Gwanru, a pavilion-shaped structure constructed in 1668, and Yeonsujeon, built in 1904. Korea Jungang Daily reported that officials from the Korea Heritage Service did relocate some of Gwansan Temple's most treasured relics, including a stone Buddha statue designated a treasure by the state, in preparation for the fires on March 24th. Still, major losses worth recognizing. And possibly our most shocking headline: a No Other Land co-director was taken and beaten by Israeli forces last week. According to another of the film's co-directors, Israeli investigative journalist Yuval Abraham, and, as first reported by Al Jazeera News, Palestinian filmmaker Hamdan Balal, co-director of the 2024 Oscar-winning documentary, was attacked by Israeli settlers, then taken by Israeli soldiers in the occupied West Bank on Monday, March 24th. Balal's lawyer, Lead Semel, said 3 people, including him, suffered serious injuries from the attack and spent the night on the floor of the military base, where they were taken instead of a hospital. The activist group Center for Jewish Nonviolence told the Associated Press that, quote, dozens of settlers were involved in the attack, which left Balal's head visibly bloody. Witnesses also said Balal was blindfolded as Israeli forces detained him, end quote, before transporting him out of his village, Susia, located in the South Hebron Hills. Abraham himself described the attack as a, quote, lynch mob, end quote, on X the day of, posting footage to the site taken by Canadian activist Anna Littman to support his claims that, quote, the settlers continued to attack American activists, breaking their car with stones, end quote. Another co-director, Palestinian journalist Basil Adra, shared photos on Instagram of a seemingly exhausted Balal receiving medical treatment with bloodstains on the front of his shirt as well. This headline is important, honeys, as the incident comes so shortly after the 90-minute film's historic Oscar win for Best Feature-Length Documentary, as well as the film's content. It is extremely important as it was co-directed by 2 Israelis and 2 Palestinians and chronicles the Israeli military's destruction of homes and forced displacement of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The attack on Bilal specifically is a surprise. Abraham, who's Israeli, and Adra, who's Palestinian, both spoke on behalf of the film's production collective to condemn Israel's war on Gaza in their 2-minute Academy acceptance speech. However, Bilal himself did not make any remarks during this time. The singling out of Bilal is especially concerning given that information. Said the co-director's wife, Lamia, when she heard her husband screaming on Monday night, then saw him being beaten by 3 men in uniform when she looked out the window, her thoughts were, quote, "Of course, after the Oscar, they have come to attack us more. I felt afraid," end quote. What's of even bigger picture concern is that the film has been a target of global censorship campaigns. See, for example, our coverage of the Miami Beach mayor's recently defeated threats to defund and evict an independent cinema for refusing to cancel their screenings of it as an example. No other land is still lacking a distributor in the U.S., limiting access even further. More bad press for RISD last week as headlines announced they had shuttered a show of pro-Palestine anti-colonial art. The school's administration shut down the exhibition in a public campus cafe called Car House after an X account/doxing platform, Stop Anti-Semitism, published images of the show's artworks on Thursday, March 20th with accusations the show, quote, promoted violence against Jews and called for the removal of Israel, end quote. Titled To Every Orange Tree, the show featured works of around 20 artists, including current students and alumni. It was organized by the art school's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, aka RSJP, and Car House, with an opening date of March 17th. RSJP said that back in January, a participation call seeking artworks to engage with, quote, anti-imperialist mindsets and political resistance, end quote, went out, and that the school had approved those calls and the show at large at that time. 6 days after the doxing occurred on Wednesday, March 26th, RISD President Crystal Williams said in an email to students that the exhibition had been the focus of negative public attention, including calls for its removal, end quote, before confirming that the show would be relocated to the Providence, Washington building, which is not open to the public. A spokesperson for the school said, quote, relocating the exhibition enables us to prioritize safety, honor our commitments to artistic expression and freedom of speech, and uphold our commitment to a culture of care, particularly in these fraught times, end quote. The show will reopen on April 7th after spring break in its new location, but participating artists expressed concerns about the move to a private building requiring ID swipes. Furthermore, students involved told Hyperallergic they were not consulted about the decision to move their artworks. Participating artist/sophomore Sadie, with no last name provided, said that, quote, it made me really angry because it's a really common thing to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, which are totally different things. And it's very frustrating that the school doesn't recognize the distinction between those two, end quote. Sadie did confirm that she herself is Jewish. Furthermore, other works in the show didn't reference Israel or Palestine at all, but instead other topics like Hawaii's last monarch before the United States' takeover, Queen Liliuokalani, or wage gaps between RISD custodians and the school's board of trustees. The headline stood out to us honeys because the current administration has been pretty quickly expanding its influence on college campuses in efforts to suppress anti-Zionist demonstrations. Examples include recent targeting of pro-Palestinian students such as Mahmoud Khalil and Tufts doctoral student Rumeysa Ozturk by the Department of Homeland Security. According to the RSJP spokesperson, the latter's arrest is the latest in a string of incidents targeting international students, which has heightened tensions on RISD's campus. But with that headline came a bit of balance. We heard the Connecticut-based Palestine Museum will launch a satellite space in Edinburgh. The Palestine Museum US of Woodbridge will launch a European satellite project in the central Newtown section of Edinburgh this May, in spite of growing tensions in that city over pro-Palestine activism. criticism. Faisal Saleh, the museum's director, told the art newspaper that he sees the expansion from the Connecticut base as urgent after Palestinian cultural events surrounding Scotland in the UK have continuously been cancelled in the last year. The Arnolfini Arts Centre in Bristol, for example, cancelled a Palestinian film screening and poetry event in December, citing security concerns, and in fall of 2024, the University of Edinburgh accused its chapter of Justice for Palestine Society of threatening staff and members of its administration shortly after protests, which included blockades and the occupation of university buildings. Saleh had explored renting the former Israeli embassy in Dublin early on in this process, but was unsuccessful in that attempt. The museum's new Edinburgh space, previously occupied by a private gallery, provides over 1,100 square feet. The first exhibition there will open on May 17th and will feature artists like Samia Halabi, who won a special mention at last year's Venice Biennale. And finally, an exciting headline to close us out: a forgotten work at a French museum has been attributed to the famed Renaissance painter Lavinia Fontana. Once thought to have been the work of Flemish Renaissance painter Peter Porbus, who lived 1523 through 84, the piece is now reattributed to Lavinia Fontana, one of the foremost female painters of the Italian Renaissance and among the first to paint professionally in the West. The painting in question is titled Portrait of a Gentleman, His Daughter, and a Servant, and as you might expect, depicts all three: the father in a fashionable black suit with a pleated collar sitting on an armchair. His daughter is similarly nicely dressed, handing him some flowers, and behind them is the maid placing a basket of fruits. The work has been in the collections of the Provincial Musée de la Chartreuse in Douai since 1857, but according to the Agence France-Presse, it was only re-examined recently by Florentine and Roman art specialist Philippe Costamagna as part of an effort to study and restore the museum's collection of Italian paintings. The specialist saw the painting in storage and insisted, quote, "It's an Italian painting, Bolognese in spirit from A to Z. Everything is reminiscent of it, the little girl with the little flowers, the strokes on the collar and on the sleeve," end quote. He told the French publication that it's in fantastic condition. Pierre Bonheur, director of the musée, hopes it won't be the last treasure to come out of his museum's archives, as the museum displays around 750 artworks at a time, but has almost 70,000 in storage. All right, honeys, there's our buzz for the week. I hope that this sort of sandwich approach to the good and bad that I've taken is working. I know it's been a rough week, month, year in terms of news, but I am trying to keep you informed and trying to keep you smiling and learning, so hopefully it's working. We'll be back again next week with a new Beesness and a new episode, so keep your ears peeled. Until then, take care, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugnout. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.